Imagine standing in your own private room, yet never truly being alone as a silent observer watches from above the flickering candle flames. Every fleeting thought and every stir of the physical body is recorded into a divine ledger that governs the very soul within you tonight. The Church did not just rule over the kingdoms of the earth, they established a dominion over the very sanctuary of your nightly rest. Under this gaze, your most private moments were no longer yours, but became a matter of cosmic significance and potential eternal judgment for everyone. The air itself feels heavy with the weight of unseen expectations, a constant pressure to remain pure in thought, word, and physical action. You are a subject in a kingdom where the borders are not made of stone, but of moral codes that reach into the heart. This was the invisible cage of the soul, a glass house where every movement was scrutinized by the authorities of the heavens and earth. The architecture of the Middle Ages was designed to make you feel small, reminding you that your desires are nothing compared to eternity. From the pulpit, the message was clear: the flesh is a battleground where the war for your immortal soul is fought every single day. The scent of holiness was often mingled with the cold sweat of fear, as believers navigated the treacherous waters of their own natural instincts. Think of the panopticon, a structure where every cell is visible from a central tower, ensuring that every prisoner behaves as if watched. This eye did not belong to a guard, but to the Creator, and its gaze penetrated through walls and into the deepest secrets of hearts. Every impulse was a line item in a spiritual balance sheet, a record that would determine your place in the life that follows death. Community life was centered around the steeple, a physical reminder that the laws of God were the primary laws of the physical world. To exist was to be under surveillance, a condition that shaped the very way people perceived their own bodies and their most intimate feelings. The storm of judgment was always on the horizon, ready to strike down those who dared to prioritize earthly pleasure over divine command and law. They lived in a world where the supernatural was more real than the ground beneath their feet, influencing every choice they made in life. This was the foundation of a moral empire, a system designed to regulate the most powerful of human drives through the lens of faith. Saint Augustine arrived at a pivotal moment, bringing a software update for the human soul that would change the course of history forevermore. He was a man torn between the intellectual heights of philosophy and the visceral pulls of his own youthful, passionate and chaotic earthly desires. For Augustine, the fall of man wasn't just a story, it was the biological reality of why we feel shame in our very own skin. He redefined desire as the signature of our fall, a lingering symptom of the original sin that disconnected us from the purity of God. Imagine your body as an old carriage, where the soul is the driver desperately trying to restrain the wild horses of your natural carnal instincts. If Adam had never sinned, Augustine argued, we would reproduce with the same calm intention we use to move our fingers or our toes. Instead, we are left with a process that is sweaty, involuntary, and deeply chaotic, a constant reminder of our loss of self-control in the garden. The body became an enemy to be conquered, a vessel of potential sin that required constant vigilance and a spirit of deep, endless penance. These writings became the bedrock of Western morality, shaping the laws of the bedroom for the next 1,000 years of human history and culture. To follow the path of the spirit meant turning one's back on the pleasures of the flesh, a difficult road paved with constant spiritual struggle. The shame they felt was now inherited by every child born into the world, a heavy spiritual debt that only the Church could help pay. Augustine's legacy was a world where human nature itself was seen as tainted, requiring a life of regulation to achieve a chance at salvation. His ideas were not just theology, they were the blueprints for a social order that prioritized spiritual purity above all other human needs and desires. The struggle was eternal, a friction between the divine light of the mind and the heavy, earthly pull of the physical body we inhabit. From the monasteries of Africa to the cathedrals of Europe, the doctrine of original sin redefined what it meant to be a human being. Self-reflection became an act of searching for hidden sins, a constant audit of the soul's most secret and shameful corners and hidden desires. The classical celebration of the human form was replaced by a medieval suspicion of the body as a trap for the unwary soul. Life was a narrow path through a dark forest, where the only light came from the teachings of the fathers and the grace of God. Every stroke of the pen reinforced the idea that the soul must be polished until it could reflect the perfection of the divine creator. Without the guidance of the Church, Augustine believed the soul would surely be lost in the violent storms of its own unbridled human passions. He locked the door on the old ways of the world, creating a new moral architecture that would stand for many centuries to come. His influence was total, turning the most intimate parts of human existence into a theological problem that required a very specific and divine solution. The stage was set for the Church to become the ultimate arbiter of human desire, directing the flow of life through strict moral channels. Enter the penitentials, the technical manuals for the soul that turned every act of intimacy into a series of regulated rules and consequences. These books were like a restaurant menu of moral failure, where every transgression had a price tag of prayer, fasting, or public penance. The Church cared more about your sleeping position than a modern orthopedic doctor, ensuring that even in rest, you were following divine protocol. The Holy Calendar was a minefield of restrictions, forbidding intimacy on Sundays, feast days, fast days, and during a woman's cycle for all. It was as if the bedroom had a tax collector standing in the corner, demanding payment for every moment of happiness in the dark of night. Only one position was deemed natural and holy, turning a multifaceted human experience into a narrow, repetitive act of duty and procreation only. Deviation from these rules was not just a mistake, it was a rebellion against the natural order established by the Church and God Himself. Failing to follow the rules could lead to a month of bread and water, a physical punishment for a moment of unbridled physical pleasure. The narrow gate to heaven was mirrored in the narrow rules of the bedroom, making life a constant exercise in restraint and spiritual discipline. Every day of the year was categorized as either clean or unclean for physical connection, turning time itself into a religious moral obstacle. The psychological impact was profound, as even the most natural instincts became sources of potential anxiety and deep, lingering fear of divine punishment. There was no separation between the sacred and the profane. Every aspect of domestic life was under the jurisdiction of the ecclesiastical courts above. The bedroom was no longer a private sanctuary, but a space where the rules of the kingdom were enforced with bureaucratic and spiritual precision. Lust was categorized, sub-categorized, and assigned a specific penance, leaving no room for the complexity or the spontaneity of real human passion. The goal was to transform the body into a temple, but often it felt more like a prison cell where the soul served time. Every pleasure was weighed against its spiritual cost, creating a world where every act was a calculation of potential time in purgatory later. Self-denial was the highest virtue, and the Church provided the detailed instructions on how to deny oneself in every possible way and moment. Time was measured in penance, and the biological rhythms of life were forced to conform to the rigid schedule of the liturgical year's demands. The eyes of the Church were everywhere, from the great cathedrals to the smallest village lanes, ensuring the technical manual was always followed. Knowledge of the rules was essential, as ignorance was no excuse for the violation of a holy commandment in the eyes of God. The shadow of the Church grew until it encompassed every part of life, leaving no corner for the messy reality of human biology to exist. And where the manuals ended, the confessional began a place where the most secret failures were brought into the light of the priest's presence. The confessional was a medieval theatre of the soul, where the act of speaking your sins out loud became a ritual of deep humiliation. Secrets that were never meant to be heard by human ears were whispered into the darkness, creating a heavy atmosphere of shared, hidden shame. The priest was not just a man, he was the ear of God, a bridge between the sinner's guilt and the possibility of divine forgiveness. But this forgiveness often came with a price, the internalizing of the idea that one's natural desires were fundamentally wrong and needed to be purged. For those who struggled most, the Church offered more extreme methods of spiritual survival, like wearing the painful and constant irritation of a hair shirt. A sudden surge of desire could be met with the shock of ice-cold water, a physical jolt to remind the body of its subservient status. Shame was a powerful tool of social and spiritual control, a ghost that followed you home and sat with you in the quiet moments. The body was treated as a rebellious animal that needed to be broken and tamed through the application of physical pain and constant discomfort. The internal dialogue of the believer became a constant battle against the self, a psychological struggle that lasted from dawn until the deepest night. The mirror of the soul was perpetually clouded by the smoke of potential sin, making it impossible to see oneself with any sense of clarity. Guilt was a collective experience, a shared burden that bound the community together under the watchful eye and the heavy hand of the Church. The bell tolled for every secret sin, a constant acoustic reminder of the omnipresence of divine judgment and the need for unending spiritual vigilance. The threat of hell was not a metaphor. It was a vivid, terrifying reality that was painted on the walls of every church in the land. Every instinct was a potential trapdoor to damnation, requiring a level of constant psychological focus that was both exhausting and profoundly deeply transformative for all. The presence of the spiritual authorities was felt even in the most private moments, a psychological shadow that never quite left the modern mind. Even the appreciation of beauty became suspicious if it was not directed purely toward the glory of the Creator and the Church's divine mission. The stain of sin was seen as nearly impossible to remove, requiring a lifetime of scrubbing the soul with the harsh soap of penance. The institution was built on this tension, a perpetual cycle of desire, guilt, and confession that kept the population in a state of spiritual dependence. For many, the only peace was the promise of a future world where the struggles of the flesh would finally be left behind forever. The moments of light were fleeting, a brief glimpse of a freedom that was always just out of reach under the current moral regime. These were the instruments of a spiritual surgery, intended to cut away the parts of the human experience that the Church deemed too dangerous. Individual identity was often lost in the quest for spiritual perfection, a small sacrifice on the altar of a much larger, divine purpose and plan. The scale of the system was monumental, a complex machine designed to process the human spirit into something acceptable to the heavens above us. We have stepped out of the dark stone corridors and into the neon glare of a world that celebrates what was once strictly forbidden by all. The transition was not a clean break, but a messy collision of ancient prohibitions and a new, explosive era of personal and sexual freedom today. We are now the masters of our own desires, or so we tell ourselves as we navigate a world that has removed the old boundaries. But the ghost of shame is a persistent spirit, a lingering echo of a moral programming that has been running for over 1,000 years. We often find ourselves still judging our own bodies through a lens that was ground in the workshops of the medieval church and its fathers. It is as if the sense of guilt was written into our cultural DNA, a software code that continues to run in the background of our lives. Our art, our laws, and our deepest insecurities still bear the marks of the centuries spent under the watchful eye of the moral authorities. To understand the present, we must recognize the influence of the past, the way the Church's definitions of sin shaped our understanding of ourselves. Liberation is not just the absence of rules, but the process of deconstructing the internal walls that were built long before we were even born. We are rediscovering the beauty of the human form and the naturalness of our desires, stripping away the layers of inherited shame and fear. The calendar of forbidden days is being rewritten, replaced by a personal understanding of what it means to live a fulfilling and authentic human life. Every step forward is a reclamation of a territory that was once occupied by a foreign power, the territory of our own bodies and souls. The chains are often invisible, made of ideas and expectations that we have carried without even knowing where they originally came from or why. We are learning that to be human is to be complex, and that our physical nature is not a symptom of a fall, but a gift. Intimacy is being redefined, moving from a regulated duty to a shared language of connection, exploration, and deep, meaningful mutual respect and care. The gaze of the observer has been replaced by the gaze of the self, a more compassionate and understanding way of seeing our own nature. The legacy of the Church is a part of our story, but it does not have to be the end of our story as we move forward. We are writing our own manuals now, based on consent, communication, and a celebration of the wonderful diversity of the human experience and life. The height of our freedom is matched by the depth of our responsibility to ourselves and to each other in this new world of ours. We are passing on a different inheritance to the next generation, one that values self-acceptance and the beauty of being truly and fully human. The eye of God has become the eye of the human, a mirror that reflects our own potential for love, kindness, and deep personal growth. The spirit is not a separate thing to be saved from the body, but a part of the whole, flying free from the old cages. We are finding the divine in the human and the sacred in the physical, bridging the gap that was created so many centuries ago by men. The journey is long, and the shadows of the past still linger, but we are moving toward a brighter and more inclusive future for everyone. Understanding the past is the key to our liberation, allowing us to see the walls for what they are and to walk past them. We are finally learning that our most natural instincts are not a source of shame, but a part of the beautiful mystery of being alive. The influence of the past remains, but the power to define our own future is finally, and truly, back in our very own human hands.